Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Algorithm. I'm your host, Victor Vinciant, Mr. Accountable Masculinity, author, podcaster. You know the name, you know why you're here. We're going to do a little bit of history with this particular episode today, and we're going to review a content creator's take on um, The Black Bourgeoisie, the book written by Dr. E. Franklin Frazier. And he published the book in 1957. And he's a sociologist that created Howard University, if I'm not mistaken, or part of the staff. Major accomplishments in Black history, and he wrote a book that cited everything that he was seeing during his time frame, and it kind of like blew my mind when I heard about it, because some of the same complaints that we have that is affiliated with the new popular term Black fatigue. There was a lot of Black fatigue back then too. So when I was checking out this content from Brooklyn St. Michael, shout out to him again, I decided that, hey, if I didn't know about it, you guys probably didn't know about it. So we're going to take a second and we're going to watch this particular piece of content and learn something together. So without further ado, let's go.
Now, when I first read about the 1950s Black American middle class, I was surprised, and you'll see why as we go over the account. Now, more importantly, this history matters because it shows exactly how, if people keep thinking and believing the same, they'll continue acting the same and producing children who repeat the same patterns, right? And so as we go over this 1950s Black American culture, we're going to read from this book right here, Black Bourgeoisie, written by sociologist Dr. E. Franklin Frazier. So let's go in here and let's turn to page 204, where it says this: the exclusion of the middle-class Negroes from participation in general life of the American community has affected their entire outlook on life. Now, what exclusion is he talking about? He's talking about not being accepted by whites, which he describes as one of the primary aims of this Black middle-class group. And wanting to be accepted socially by whites, it has its roots in this inferiority complex that was developed during slavery. So let's continue. It has meant that whites did not take Negroes seriously, that whites did not regard the activities of Negroes as of any real consequence in American life. It has tended to encourage a spirit of irresponsibility or an attitude of play or make-believe among them. And in this book, Dr. Frazier talks about this group exaggerating their wealth to make it seem like they were doing financially better than what they were actually doing, and that their business, their profession, and their education was not something that they took actually seriously, right? This was part of that make-believe world that they had created. Now let's go over to page 207 and let's talk about this play attitude. As a consequence of the prestige of society, many Negro professional men and women take more seriously their recreation than their professions. Once, the writer heard a Negro doctor who was prominent socially say that he would rather lose a patient than have his favorite baseball team lose a game. This was an extreme expression of the relative value of professional work and recreation among the Black bourgeoisie. At the same time, it is indicative of the value which many Negro professional men and women, including college professors, place upon sports. Here we go with the sports. Now, remember, this was written in the 1950s, where we're seeing an account where Dr. Frazier is explaining that these professional Blacks were already placing a higher value on sports than their actual profession. Let's continue. Except when they are talking within their narrow field of their professions, their conversations are generally limited to sports, baseball, and football. And if he were writing this today, he would have added basketball to this list as well. Let's continue. They follow religiously the scores of the various teams and the achievements of all the players. For hours, they listen to the radio accounts of sports and watch baseball and football games on television. They became learned in the comments of sports writers. And I remember in the Marine Corps, I knew multiple guys who had what it seemed like to know all the stats on multiple players, like in the NFL and in the NBA, right? They could tell you what team they were on, what team won the Super Bowl, who won the NBA championship, what year they won it, which college they went to, what stats they had in college. I mean, it seemed like they knew the full thing. Who coached which team, how many years? I mean, the full thing. And at this point, I had already stopped watching sports to any significant degree. So I wasn't up to the latest information, but it was fascinating just how much time and effort that they had spent to accumulate this knowledge, right? Because even when I did watch sports more frequently, I wasn't nearly as knowledgeable as these guys were, right? I played basketball for my high school team, right? And I knew enough to have surface level conversations about what was going on, right? And after high school, I pretty much lost most of my interest in sports. The only thing that I may watch today is a few highlights from boxing or MMA, and that's about it, right? But if you were to ask me today who won the Super Bowl or the NBA championship this year, last year, or the year before, or whenever, I would be absolutely clueless. And if you ask me about which player plays on which team today, I would be just as clueless, right? Because I don't have a desire to stay informed on that subject. It's not important enough for me, right? But it is a surprising to see that the Negro has had a long history of prioritizing sports. Let's continue. Often they make long journeys in order to see their favorite teams, white or Negro.
By the way, I agree with what he said too. The older I've gotten, the less connected with sports I have. I do leave room for Alabama football, and that's about it right now. But hey, let's go.
Play baseball and football games. The prominent role of sports in the serious playing of Negro society stems partly from certain traditions in the Negro community. It reflects to some extent the traditions of the gentlemen who engaged in no serious work. But in addition, preoccupation of Negro society with sports is related to its preoccupation with gambling, especially poker. And this culture is stemming from the old Southern culture where the rednecks were involved in these types of activities as well. The blacks were influenced a lot by these types of people in many different areas of the development of black culture, right? Now, from here, let's go a little bit into their culture of self-hate and low self-esteem in this next part, right? Which is important because it gives insight as to why blacks today take interest in certain programs and why they shy away from certain fields. And so let's go on here to page 216, where it says this. Since the black bourgeoisie cannot escape identification with Negroes, they experience certain feelings of insecurity because of their feeling of inferiority. Their feeling of inferiority is revealed in their fear of competition with whites. There is first a fear of competition with whites for jobs. Notwithstanding the fact that middle-class Negroes are the most vociferous in demanding the right to compete on equal terms with whites, many of them still fear such competition. They prefer the security afforded by their monopoly of certain occupations within the segregated Negro community. For example, middle-class Negroes demand that 2 Negro medical schools be reserved for Negro students and that a quota be set for white students, though Negro students are admitted to white medical schools. What they're really saying is that they don't believe that they can compete intellectually with these other groups, right? They may give all sorts of other reasons, but the underlying belief is that they don't believe that they can compete in these areas. You got to understand this, because you won't find a quota system in professions like basketball or football, right? Because they're confident that they can compete in that area. But when it comes to these intellectual matters and thinking, right, they don't think that they can compete in there because that's what they have come to believe about themselves, right? But you have to understand this, that the truth is that anyone can be competitive in any profession or any intellectual subject if they have a dominant desire to do so. But the blacks, they're never going to be able to be competitive in those areas if they continue to spend vast amounts of time indulging in sports and entertainment. It's just not going to work. It does not work that way, right? You cannot compete against people in intellectual professions who do the opposite, right? And they spend the vast majority of their time on these intellectual matters and minimal time on sports and entertainment, right? These are just the basics that we're talking about, right? These are the basics. Now let's continue. Since the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled against segregated public schools, many Negro teachers, even those who are well prepared, fear that they cannot compete with whites for teaching positions. Although this fear stems principally from a feeling of inferiority, which is experienced generally by Negroes, it has other causes. The majority of the black bourgeoisie fear competition with whites, partly because such competition would mean that whites were taking them seriously and consequently, they would have to assume a more serious and responsible attitude towards their work. And competition would mean that they would have to give up many of the low value activities like sports and shooting the breeze on insignificant topics, right? And they would have to replace those with higher value activities like reading, studying more challenging subjects, right? Thinking and analyzing, basically breaking free of the inherited Negro consciousness. Let's continue. Middle class Negroes, who are notorious for their inefficiencies in management of various Negro institutions, excuse their inefficiency on the grounds that Negroes are a young race and therefore will require time to attain the efficiency of the white man. The writer has heard a Negro college president who has constantly demanded that Negroes have equality in American life declare before white people in extenuation of the shortcomings of his own administration that Negroes were a child race and that they had to crawl before they could walk. And so they were saying that in the 1950s, which I could understand to some degree, but it looks like Dr. E. Franklin Frazier is not buying that excuse even at that time, right? But it's crazy to hear that people still today say the same thing, right? Going round and round on the hamster wheel and going a whole lot of nowhere. Let's continue. Such declarations, while flattering to the whites, are revealing in that they may manifest the black bourgeoisie's contempt for the Negro masses, while excusing its own deficiencies by attributing them to the latter. Yet it is clear that the black worker who must gain a living in a white man's mill or factory and in competition with white workers cannot offer any such excuse for his inefficiency. And most people don't care about the excuse either. They need you to do a job. Let's continue. The fear of competition with whites is probably responsible for the black bourgeois fear of competence and first-rate performance within its own ranks. When a Negro is competent and insists upon first-rate work, it appears to this class that he is trying to be a white man, or that he is insisting that Negroes measure up to white standards. You see that? That's the black consciousness that has to be separated from, because it's a consciousness that's meant to hold people down into the pit. Because the ones who have this mindset, they have zero intention to improve, right? And they have every intention to keep someone down who's trying to improve.
So what you're hearing so far is historical black fatigue. Historical black fatigue. I want that to be captured here. Like the problems that we have now in modern day that we're just rebranding, that's all it is just repackaging and rebranding the same thing. Now, this book was published in 1957, and he's going to say that quite a few more times, but I wanted to connect the black fatigue conversation to historically written documents so we can see what we need to do once we understand what the problem is and how long the problem has persisted, and do we really want to fix it? And that, because that's the other question. A lot of people are very, very comfortable at re-diagnosing the same problem and never do anything about it and just being experts at the same issue. So we're going to finish up.